Accountability, winning versus wokeness, and the dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials, and the millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer. And this podcast is called Accountability, Winning versus Wokeness. Would you rather win wars, or would you have a woke military that isn't focused on winning wars, but instead is focused on being woke and politically correct? Well, that is the problem now in the United States of America, and that's why we're calling this podcast Accountability, Winning versus Wokeness. And first up, we have, of course, in the Daily Caller, an article, There Must Be Accountability. 90 retired flag officers call on Austin and Milley to resign immediately. Nearly 90 retired generals and admirals signed a letter Monday calling for Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and Joint Chiefs Chairman General Mark Milley to resign over their roles surrounding the chaotic U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. The retired flag officers argued that as principal military advisors to President Joe Biden, Austin and Milley should have recommended against this dangerous withdrawal in the strongest possible terms. Quote, if they did not do everything within their authority to stop the hasty withdrawal, they should resign, they wrote. Conversely, if they did do everything within their ability to persuade the president to not hastily exit the country without first ensuring the safety of our citizens and Afghans loyal to America, then they should have resigned in protest as a matter of conscience and public statement. A fundamental principle in the military is holding those in charge responsible and accountable for their actions or inactions. There must be accountability at all levels for this tragic and avoidable debacle, the letter further read. General Kenneth McKenzie, commander of the United States Central Command, announced early Monday that the United States U.S. flight out of Afghanistan had departed from the capital city of Kabul. That was the last flight that had departed. The departure effectively marked the end of the 20-year United States combat mission in Afghanistan that culminated in the Taliban taking control of most of the country and declaring a new Islamic emirate. In other words, we literally went back to the future. Secretary of State Antony Blinken noted that there were still more than 200 Americans remaining in Afghanistan who wanted to leave as of Sunday morning, around 24 hours from the departure of the last U.S. flight. It remains unclear how many of those Americans were left behind in Afghanistan as of Monday. The consequences of this disaster are enormous and will reverberate for decades, beginning with the safety of Americans and Afghans who are unable to move safely to evacuation points, therefore being de facto hostages of the Taliban at this time, the retired flag officers wrote in Monday's letter. Quote, the damage to the reputation of the United States is indescribable. We are now seen and will be seen for many years as an unreliable partner in any multinational agreement or operation, the letter continued. Biden, of course, is supposed to address the nation on the now completed U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan sometime today, as a matter of fact, because it's Tuesday, sometime today. Kind of interesting because we have 90 retired flag officers of the United States military who are calling for these two individuals to resign. It's just indescribable because such a thing just doesn't happen. And if you wonder why we're in Afghanistan for 20 years, if you want to wonder and ask the question how we got out of Afghanistan and was it the right way to get out? Well, here's another article for you. The Taliban, now that they're in full control and the U.S. has left completely, other than the 200 approximate Americans they've left behind, the Taliban is committing house-to-house executions in Kabul after the U.S. exit, as chilling audio demonstrates Afghans' biggest fear. Horrifying audio of distant gunshots appears to confirm reports of house-to-house executions as the Taliban asserts control of Kabul and Afghanistan after the U.S. military's departure on Monday evening. An Afghan man who worked with Americans on the ground provided Fox News with a chilling audio featuring distant gunshots. I think there's a conflict between the Taliban. I have no idea where I'm located. From everywhere I hear the sounds of shooting gunfire, I have no idea how to leave, the Afghan man said in the audio clip recorded around the time of the final U.S. plane having left Kabul. And those sounds were going on throughout Afghanistan because naturally, if you are the Taliban, the first thing you want to do is make sure you execute any opposition, literally execute them, kill them, and execute anyone that in any way has helped the American military and the American efforts, because you naturally want to extend your power because you're used to being completely in control. And that's the way you do it. You do it through complete fear. It's the old reign of terror, like Robespierre. It's what's going on now in Afghanistan. And so Joy Reid of MSNBC, seeing all this happening, seeing all of this happening in Afghanistan, how awful the Biden administration is doing in governing our economy and governing our international affairs, excuses the U.S. faltering in Afghanistan. She says, we can't even make our own democracy fully work. And so MSNBC host Joy Reid used the chaotic troop withdrawal from Afghanistan on Monday to take a shot at the United States on the domestic front, saying, we can't even make our own democracy fully work. During the segment, Reid argues the U.S. was learning that we are not Superman, that remaking the world is something it was unable to do, and the U.S. needed to focus on its own because of its own struggles. War is messy. There is no pretty way to lose a war, Reid said, as she asked Representative Jake Auchincloss, a Democrat from Massachusetts, about how veterans of Afghanistan were feeling, knowing they fought a mission that couldn't have been accomplished. And this is what's remarkable about MSNBC, because even at this late hour, Joy Reid is still a talking head for the Democrat Party when they are failing us on every front. And she focuses on, of all things, domestic policy, of what we should really be doing as a domestic, on domestic policy front about vaccinations. You can't believe this. We had that clip, and here it is.
I think America is doing some growing up this week and learning that we are not Superman. We are not Captain America from the comics. We can't change and solve and remake the world. For God's sakes, we can't even make our own democracy fully work. We can't even get our own population to accept being vaccinated. Our democracy is teetering as well. And so we might want to do a little inward looking and try to fix the one that we have here, lest we lose it. A cautionary tale for all.
So Afghans are being murdered, of course, en masse, and for any reason and for no reason by the Taliban, because that's what the Taliban does. And Joy Reid's like, well, we need to focus on our own democracy because, after all, it's not fully working because we can't even get people vaccinated in this country because they don't want to get vaccinated. Those dastardly Trump voters. I mean, this woman is just disgusting. She's just disgusting. And the fact that she's incapable of engaging in critical thinking skills and thinking about the human lives that are being lost in Afghanistan. And the fact of the matter is, in the United States, you have control of your own health care. If you choose to not get vaccinated, that is your choice, period. Period. Likewise, if you choose to get vaccinated, you should be given all of the information about all the dangers about being vaccinated, potentially being vaccinated, the potential dangers. And you should also know those same things if you are not going to be vaccinated. What are the potential dangers? What are the potential risks that you might engage in? That's really where we are in the United States. And I just ask people to cool out and engage in critical thinking skills. But then Joy Reid is like, everybody must be vaccinated. You must follow the order. I mean, this is literally what these people think. And Representative Garamendi he's from California, by the way. This guy has always seemed to me like he's a little mentally ill, but he's a United States congressman. Representative Garamendi spins the Taliban takeover by saying that The seized U.S. weaponry, like all those weapons we left behind, was really the property of the Afghan government. It was really like that really belonged to them. So the Democrats are circling the wagons, and they're trying, they're doing everything they can to explain this incredible, epic failure of the Biden administration to withdraw from Afghanistan. Emphasis on the withdrawal, right? Not the decision to withdraw, because the decision to get out of Afghanistan, I support. I've supported that for quite some time, but it's the manner in which you get out of Afghanistan, and also when you extricate yourself, it's probably not something that you can do really quickly. I mean, you really have to engage in a lot of planning, and it's pretty clear that there was pretty much no planning, because their plan was, well, the Karzai government was going to maintain control while we left and took people with us, people who helped us as well as the Americans, and then Afghanistan would then probably fall. And if it did, we would hope that it didn't, but if it did, then so be it. But nonetheless, this particular representative, Garamunde, says that all of the weaponry the U.S. left behind was technically property of the U.S. government. And Will Brown had tweeted, he tweeted out a mind-blowing graphic in today's Times on what $85 billion of lost equipment means in practice to the Taliban. 8,000 trucks we left behind. I'm just going to name a few. 22,000 Humvees. 22,000 Humvees. 634 tanks. 162,000 radios. Jesus. 155 of these big, mine-proof vehicles. 16,000 night vision goggles. Why in the heck would we give that to them? 169 armored personnel carriers, 42,000 trucks and SUVs. Jeez. 358,000 assault rifles. And 126,000 pistols, just to name a few, not to mention fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters that were left behind. Can you imagine that any president of the United States would leave that stuff behind? I mean, because if you didn't need those things, those machines and pieces of armament to get out of the country, then why wouldn't you first spend many months slowly airlifting it out and bringing it back to the United States or repositioning it to other bases across the world? Why wouldn't you do that first while you were still in control of Kabul? But they left it behind, and it seems pretty clear to me that it was left behind on purpose, podcast listeners. I've said this before. I believe the Biden administration, through the CIA, made a deal, and Anthony Blinken too, but they made a deal with the Taliban that they want them to be in charge, and in exchange for giving them all this military equipment, in exchange for the United States giving all of this military equipment to the Taliban would agree for the United States to have an orderly retreat and withdrawal so that they could evacuate as many citizens and Afghans as possible. Now, while it is so that perhaps as many as 200 Americans are still there, and I have no doubt there are still plenty of Afghanis that would love to leave as well, the fact of the matter is that's probably the deal that was made. And it was made with the full understanding of, I'm sure, the U.S. military, the CIA, the NSA, and the President of the United States, and the Secretary of State. I'm convinced, because why else would you leave all those weapons? It was a payoff. The weapons are a payoff to the Taliban for kind of laying back to the full extent that the Taliban can really lay back, obviously, because they're savages, while we leave the country. I'm convinced. And I'm also convinced that we did it. We gave the country back to the Taliban because we don't want the country to be occupied instead by China or by Russia, or to have Chinese or Russian influence there instead. And so what have we left behind? Not just all this machinery, and not only potentially 200 Americans, but the Taliban which celebrates the U.S. exit from Afghanistan and now vows to enforce Islamic rule. So the Taliban is going to enforce Islamic rule again. So after 20 years of trying to educate and teach moderation and the American principle of freedom of religion, the idea that you should live in a country where people have the right to freely practice their religion, whatever religion that may be, as long as it doesn't hurt others. Well, apparently it's had very little impact on Afghanistan, or certainly very little impact on the Taliban. And they're going to go full throttle back to where they were, which is to enforce Islamic rule. And we all know what that means, which means you must follow Islamic rule or else. But of course, with Joy Reid, from MSNBC, she thinks our democracy is really the problem because you won't get vaccinated. But meanwhile, you have the Taliban saying, follow our rules or else. Sounds very similar to me. So next up, the CCP limits gaming to 3 hours. Boy, can you imagine if you did that in the United States? So that's the Communist Party, the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, has said to everyone in China, you can only play games, online games, gaming. You can only do that for 3 hours a week. That is the edict, the decree coming out of Beijing. So Reuters says in Shanghai, China has forbidden anyone under 18 from playing video games for more than 3 hours a week, a stringent social intervention that is said to it was needed to pull the plug on a growing addiction to what it once described as spiritual opium. The new rules, published on Monday, are part of a major shift by Beijing to strengthen control over its society and key sectors of its economy, including tech, education, and property, after years of runaway growth. The restrictions, which apply to any devices, including phones, so you can't even use your phone, right, for more than 3 hours, are a body blow to a global gaming industry that caters to tens of millions of young players in the world's most lucrative gaming market. They limit under 18 people who are under 18, from playing for more than 1 hour a day between 8 to 9 p.m. So it's not that you can just play 1 hour a day on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. So just those 3 days, you're limited to just those 3 days to play. And the playtime can only be between 8 and 9 p.m. So that way, the Chinese surveillance state will know if you're playing at 6 p.m. or 5 p.m. They'll know right away, because typically many people play on their phones, these games. Sometimes, obviously, they have gaming consoles and laptops and everything in between. But you're being monitored by the state about not having the ability to be able to play games for more than 3 hours a week, and then you're being told exactly when you can play them. It's true, man. It's completely true. So in the Wall Street Journal, same story. China limits online video games to 3 hours a week for young people. The new regulation will ban minors from playing video games entirely between Monday and Thursday. So Monday to Thursday, you better not be playing games. By the way, it doesn't say what the consequence is if you play more games. Like, what's the consequence? Will you get a lower social credit score? China has a new rule for the country's hundreds of millions of young gamers. No online video games during the school week and 1 hour a day on Fridays, weekends, and public holidays. So rather than just reading this Wall Street Journal article, which is very similar to the Reuters article, you should know this. If you try to do anything like this in the United States, can you imagine young people? I mean, the Biden administration, right now, they're engaged in these bans on social media, people like Alex Berenson, whom they banned. And clearly it's coordination between the Biden administration and big tech, and probably, I personally think, probably the CIA and the NSA and others who really, I believe for quite some time, are in very tight control of this country and are engaging in a massive surveillance state, not unlike what they're doing in China with the limiting of gaming hours for children. And so how is what the CCP is doing, limiting your ability to be able to play games for only 3 hours, any different than saying you need a vaccine passport in order to work? Let me see your papers. We must see your papers before you can work. You cannot come in this restaurant unless you can't come into the plane. You can't do anything. In fact, in New York, the U.S. Open in New York State, that was actually, I think the U.S. Open is in Long Island, But the U.S. Open, which is on Long Island, the tennis, the famous U.S. Open tennis playing, they actually required you to show proof of vaccine before you could enter. And it was a disaster. So how's that any different than what's happening in China? And this is what I think really bugs Americans right now, because it's okay for us to disagree over whether or not this vaccine is the best choice for us, especially if you've already had COVID. And rather than even going into the whole science of this matter, and which is unnecessary at this point. It's unnecessary because the information is already out there. There's plenty of information out there for you to make your own decision. And the idea that a government would say you can't work unless you have papers. You can't see the U.S. Open unless you have papers. But we do not allow you to ask that question when you're voting, right? So you could literally have a couple 100,000 Afghanis voting in the next election. Hey, we don't need to see your papers for voting. It's not necessary. And by the way, are they going to be vaccinated? I mean, we've talked about this many times before, just like all the people crossing the border, right? We know they're probably not vaccinated. And naturally, the next thing that happens is they're going to probably start voting. And that's exactly what the Democrats want. They want to remake the country by flooding it with people who, for the most part, may or may not share our values, and many of whom, not all, but many of whom may be coming here for the wrong reasons. So next up, podcast listeners, we have Go Woke or Go Broke. And the Go Woke or Go Broke series here is Michelob Ultra's Gender Equity in Sports. That's right, the beer, Michelob Ultra, has gender equity in sports, and they have a commercial about it. It's not enough for them to talk about it and to try to gain traction on Twitter so that more people will buy and drink Michelob Ultra. Oh no, this is like their company policy. And that's why it's kind of go woke or go broke. It's like, oh, you got to come on the Michelob Ultra train because we're just really cool. And, so what have they done? What has Michelob Ultra done? Well, they've decided to bring in some women athletes, but also Cece Telfer, who, of course, is a transgender who did not qualify for the U.S. Olympics in Japan. And Cece Telfer is a runner. And Cece Telfer is a biological man that is trying to, of course, and has been participating in women's sports. So in CNN Sports, CNN says transgender runner Cece Telfer is ruled ineligible to compete in U.S. Olympics. And this was back in June, of course, of this year. And the reason Cece Telfer wasn't allowed to participate, my understanding is at least, is because of the fact that Cece Telfer had very high levels of not estrogen, but testosterone. Which means that Cece Telfer is a dude, okay? So transgender runner Cece Telfer felt seen by athletes after Olympic trials ineligibility. This is in People magazine. Cece Telfer knows the importance of feeling represented in sports. The transgender track star 26, who appears in Michelob Ultra's new campaign for gender equity in sports, tells people she felt seen by her fellow competitors after she was ruled ineligible to compete at the U.S. Olympic track and field trials in June. Of course, they don't say why, They say, well, because Cece Telfer is a guy. A lot of my competitors that ran at the trials were reaching out to me, said Cece, making sure that I'm safe and everything's going well, she recalls. They were just making sure that I'm like doing all right. They were like, when are we going to compete? When are we going to run together? Because they want to race. They want to compete against the best. Isn't that funny? They want to compete against the best. The women want to compete against the best guy. That's apparently a woman. So amid various pieces of legislation that have targeted transgender women in sports, no, it has not targeted them. It has tried to make and maintain women's sports whole. Cece experienced that form of athletic policing firsthand. Again, this is in People magazine, folks. But Telfer finds it helpful that fans and other athletes have shown their support while bringing awareness to the issue. It was like, great to see that. I felt like I mattered. I felt like I was seen by my competitors, adds Telfer, who previously became the first openly transgender woman to win an NCAA title in 2019. Mom and Dad, are you really like proud of that? That your son is the first openly transgender woman to win an NCAA title? I mean, I'm sorry. I would not be proud of that. Now, Telfer is helping others feel seen through Michelob Ultra's Save It, See It campaign. Well, that sounds somewhat like an oxymoron, right? Michelob Ultra, save it, see it. I think it's too late to save it. It's already gone. To encourage fans to hit save on women's sports, highlights on social media, like, that little save button when you have a story, which will help boost visibility for female athletes. Last Thursday on Women's Equality Day, Michelob Ultra kicked off its campaign, which committed $100 million over the next 5 years, while striving to represent men's and women's sports equally through their own brand. What a bunch of nonsense. Because they're saying equity, equality. I mean, we all know what this is about. And of course, on this article, I've asked our producer, Christopher Hopkins, to show the picture of Cece in, not sure what this outfit is, and posing on the track. So, I mean, that's, you got to see it to believe it kind of thing. So Michelob Ultra, their tagline, save it, see it, or see it, save it, something like that. Well, they have an ad. They put together an ad for this, which is why it's so perfect for our Go Woke or Go Broke series. And so we have a clip of that ad. It's not the whole ad. It's about 30 seconds of it. And here it is.
You don't have to like how I look.
You don't have to like how I got here.
You don't have to like how I train.
And you definitely don't have to like how I play.
When you save women's sports,
you support women's sports.
You hit save,
Save it.
they see us. Which means we get more support.
more opportunities.
And one step closer to an equal future.
So, yeah, so that last person speaking was Cece. So I'm not really sure it should be see it, save it. I think it's more like he's got toe. I mean, I think that should be the tagline for the actual video. But I digress. And this is just ridiculous, this Go Woke or Go Broke, because of the fact that we have an individual who didn't qualify for the U.S. Olympics because the Olympic Committee said, you are a dude and you can't compete in women's track and women's sports. And so Michelob Ultra then picks up this individual as a hero and says, well, it's not your fault you're a guy. You're really, it's really not your fault you couldn't participate. So therefore, we're going to talk about equity. Well, wait a minute. Isn't the whole idea of sports merit? I mean, isn't the whole idea that the person in a women's sport such as swimming who is first won first place because of merit, and then some guy who jumps in the pool, okay, and decides he's going to compete against them and wins, that's not merit. That's cheating. And so Michelob Ultra is supporting cheating. They're not supporting equality of opportunity. They're supporting cheating. So in Michelob Ultra's own commercial, they're equating cheating with equity. which sounds about right, by the way, because equity is not about merit. And so when you don't have merit, what do you have in exchange? You have cheating. So CNN says they have a straight news piece that says there's no consensus for criteria for assigning sex at birth. I'm sorry. I'm not going to even read that because you can only imagine what CNN would say. I'm sorry. Joy Reid's probably quoted as well. So, and then also in the Daily Caller, we're on a mission. Advocacy groups campaign against trans surgeries for minors. And that article just came out today. And that's definitely worth reading because you can imagine that when some minors see commercials such as the Michelob Ultra commercial, when some minors see that, they might themselves become confused and they might themselves go try to seek help. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with seeking help. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is they might go try to seek help and they might be influenced by the commercial and they might even be influenced by that help. Case in point, in the state of Maryland, a place where I am a member of the House of Delegates, and I rarely talk about this, but in the state of Maryland, a bill passed this year that allows children as young as 12 years old, without parental consent, you heard that correctly, without parental consent, to seek health advice from such people meaning transgender advocates, individual health advocates who are talking to the child about how they're really not a boy, they're really a girl, and probably giving them advice and other kinds of encouragement to take puberty blockers so they destroy themselves during puberty. And look, this bill passed in the Maryland General Assembly, and it basically says, parents, you're cut out of this decision-making process. In fact, you're not even going to know that your child is getting this advice in school or getting this advice from a private practitioner. We're not even going to tell you that this is happening because you don't have a right to know because the kid really isn't yours. And so then we see this Michelob Ultra commercial, the He's Got Toe commercial, and that commercial is influencing these young children and confusing them. And that's what happens. It's very normal for children to be confused when they're going through puberty. And this is just ridiculous. I'm sorry. I don't think it doesn't belong in the corporate world because Michelob Ultra is on the wrong side of this issue because they've decided to recruit someone who didn't even qualify because of the fact that they're simply not a woman. So next up, podcast listeners, a California teachers union spends big on lobbying. In fact, they've spent so much, they've spent more than big oil. And you also won't believe what this teachers union leader is saying in California. So the head of the Los Angeles Teachers Union said, there is no such thing as learning loss. Despite evidence of massive educational declines due to a year of remote learning. So this is the head of the teachers union. So like, there's no learning loss. You haven't lost any capability in your education and you haven't lost any traction in your education just because you've been home and learning remotely. So Cecily Mayart Cruz, a nice hyphenated name, president of the United Teachers Los Angeles, told the LA magazine that, quote, it's okay that our babies may not have learned all their times tables. So it's okay that our babies may not have learned their times tables. They learned resilience. They learned survival. They learned critical thinking skills. They know the difference between a riot and a protest. They know the words insurrection and coup. What does that have to do with reading, writing, and arithmetic? And this just goes to show you that the union in LA and the teachers unions across America, not the rank and file teachers, the teachers unions, the tools that run the teachers unions, and they are complete tools, are not about the children. They are not even about education. They're about looking at kids as dollar signs, and they are about looking at kids as something that they can completely and utterly brainwash. Again, this is what the teacher said. She said, the students learned about survival. They learned critical thinking skills. They know the difference now between a riot and a protest. They know the words insurrection and coup. Well, I'm just wondering, is this same teachers union president teaching the children about the BLM riots? Were they riots or were they peaceful protests? I'm sure he's, can only imagine what she's teaching them. I mean, I'm sure it's anything but the truth because that's the way things are. And of course, then we've also talked about the Virginia Education Department advises teachers to avoid teaching about Muslim extremism. We talked about that on the last podcast. And then there is something that happened that is absolutely hysterical, podcast listeners. It's absolutely hysterical. And that is in Henrico County, Virginia. Okay. I actually know this county somewhat well. Henrico County, Virginia. The school board held their regular meeting. And like all meetings, you have to sign up in advance. You sign your name. Perhaps it's online. Perhaps there's just a sign-up sheet outside the school board meeting. It's one or the other. And then your name is called in order. And when it's your turn, you typically have a couple of minutes to speak. Except that in Henrico County, Virginia, someone played a hilarious Simpsons prank on that school board. And so reported in the Huffington Post, of all places. Mark and the Millennials, we're trying to pull stories from all over. But this is just really funny, podcast listeners. The Simpsons' 33rd season won't begin until September 26th, but the members of a Virginia school board inadvertently got a sneak peek of sorts from a group of pranksters. It seems that most of the names listed to be called for public comment at Thursday's meeting of the Henrico School Board actually weren't real names. They were made up. In a twist that is reminiscent of Bart Simpson prank calling Moe's Tavern with laughably fake names, some of the people who signed up to speak included the naughtily named Phil McCracken, Eileen Dover, and Wayne Kerr. Other names of those who supposedly requested public comment at the school board included Suk Maddock, Ophelia McCulk, and Don Kadek. Not surprisingly, none of these people actually showed up because it was a prank. But the thing is, at all school boards, the school board hearings are not just publicized, they're recorded. Yes, that's right, podcast listeners. They are recorded. And so someone got this idea of signing up these prankster fake names, which are also very funny because they are spelled very different from the actual intent, but sort of sounds that way when the person reading the names is reading them because it's phonetic. And the person is copying off of The Simpsons because Bart Simpson used to always call Moe's Tavern and say, "Hey, Mo, is so-and-so there?" And then Mo would go, oh, okay. And he would yell at the bar, "Hey, so-and-so, there's a call. So-and-so, there's a call." And of course it was a prank. And that same kind of name or play on names was used. Well, that was what was used at the Henrico School Board meeting. Podcast listeners, you're going to love this. Listen very closely. Here is the head of the school board calling out the names on the list and waiting for people to show up to speak. But of course they weren't there because it was a prank. We have that clip and here it is.
You answer to us, and I'm asking that you do not pass this policy in Virginia.
Thank you so much, Ms. Thomas. We do appreciate you.
Here it comes.
Phil McCracken. Phil McCracken. Suk Mahidic. Mahidic. Ophelia McHawk. Ophelia McHawk. Eileen Dover. Eileen Dover.
That was Ophelia McHawk. So, and then Eileen Dover. And so someone had a really terrific sense of humor. Way to go, because these days with the school boards, so many of them becoming just openly woke and encouraging and implementing CRT and other quote unquote anti-racism policies. Someone really got the Henrico School Board back, and it was pretty hysterical. Just to remind you, podcast listeners, just to remind you about Bart Simpson and what he would do and where this person got this idea. We have a clip from Bart Simpson calling Moe's Tavern with one such prank call. And we have that clip, and here it is.
Moe's Tavern, where the elite meet to drink.
Yeah, hello. Is Mike there? Last name, Roch.
Hold on, I'll check. Mike Roch! Mike Roch! Hey, has anybody seen Mike Roch lately? Listen to me, you little puke. One of these days, I'm gonna catch you, and I'm gonna carve my name on your back with an ice pick.
So that same exact thing, that's where the person got the idea, who signed up these names at the Henrico School Board meeting. Great job. I mean, this is what we should be doing across America, just to demonstrate to Democrats that there is a sense of humor, number one, and that we don't take their policy decisions seriously, because most of their policy decisions are just contrary to what is required to properly educate public school children. That is my personal opinion, but man, this is just a home run. So great job. So next up, podcast listeners, we have the daily Biden dumpster fire. Yes, we thought of this idea, I don't know, a couple months ago, when we realized that almost once a day, Biden has a dumpster fire mistake when he speaks. Either he mispronounces a name, or he can't remember the name he's supposed to pronounce, or he makes a policy decision or statement that just you can't even understand. So Biden calls one of his advisors a boy while at a FEMA briefing. So as you know, the hurricane came in, hit landfall, the damage is done. We wish all those people well. We really do. We know so many of them have to rebuild. So Biden went to FEMA to try to draw attention away from Afghanistan. So that's why he was there at FEMA, right? What he really should have been doing is he should have been at the FEMA for Afghanistan. You know, should have been there talking to the people in Afghanistan about how we can get the Americans out. But oh no, classic Biden. He's spending his time at FEMA so the media is paying attention to Biden at FEMA about the hurricane, because, you know, with Biden, you can't talk about Afghanistan. You're not allowed to ask any questions about it. So what a great way to redirect attention. And that's really all this was about, except that Biden, while there, engaged in a dumpster fire. First of all, the guy's name is Cedric Richmond, right? So you call it Cedric or Cedric. Richmond is his name. And Biden can't even say his name correctly, but then refers to him because since Cedric is from like the deep South, I think Louisiana is where he's from, just because of where he's from, Biden decides to refer to him as someone who knows the area really well. You know, my boy. God, I can't believe this. I mean, it's unbelievable. So we have that clip, and here it is.
Good afternoon, everybody. We're waiting for a few more people to get on, but we're going to get started, if that's okay with you all. And thanks for joining me. I'm here. The FEMA director is on. FEMA Director Chris Wells, she's on. And I'm here with my senior advisor and boy who knows Louisiana very, very well, man, and New Orleans, and Cedric Richmond.
So he's there with his boy who knows Louisiana really well. He's there with his boy. And of course, Cedric Richmond is black. He's also a former United States congressman. but he's a senior advisor to the Biden administration now. So he's a former congressman, happens to be black, happens to be from Louisiana. And because he happens to be black and because he happens to be from the South, particularly Louisiana, Biden decides to refer to him as his boy. I mean, can you absolutely imagine if any other Republican president had said such a thing? But because it's Biden, because it's Democrat president, he gets the pass. And he gets the pass while trying to divert attention away from what is going on in Afghanistan. And it is so obvious and everyone knows it. But that Biden dumpster fire, man, he just engages in it again and again. I mean, Curtis Huck on Twitter said, not only does Biden not sound great here, because he doesn't, by the way, if you listen to the whole clip, he sounds literally like he doesn't even know where he is. Not only does Biden not sound great here, but also called Cedric Richmond a boy, something the left would lose it if he were a Republican saying the same thing. I'm here with my senior advisor and boy who knows Louisiana very, very well, man, and New Orleans, Cedric Richmond. Jeez, it's unbelievable. And that is the daily Biden dumpster fire. Many more to come, I'm quite sure. So next up, podcast listeners, we have the dumbest bill in America. And do we have a lead up? Mr. Producer.
Of course.
And here it is. And it's the dumbest bill in America. And it is banning single family homes in California. Yes, you got that right. Banning single family homes in California, gutting the suburbs, importing the ghetto to the suburbs. In Cal Matters magazine, right? It's an online magazine. It gives you all of the updates to what is happening in the California legislature and also with the recall election and elsewhere. Obviously, it is a left-leaning magazine, to say the least. It says, California's housing crisis. How much difference will a zoning bill make? So, on a few of the vast verdant lawns in East Sacramento, one of the capital city's most popular and expensive neighborhoods, yellow and black yard signs urge passersby to save neighborhoods and keep Sacramento livable and diverse. The message symbolizes a big battle taking place at the state capitol only a few miles away. Whether to do away with the sacrosanct single-family neighborhoods to address California's housing crisis. Think about this, podcast listeners. California has a housing crisis, and there are a whole bunch of reasons why they have this housing crisis, not the least of which is the fact that California is just too crowded because of over illegal immigration, right? Illegal immigration shouldn't occur to begin with, but they've allowed it for so long, and it's been so out of control for so long, there are too many people that live there. And the quality of life has declined, and there aren't enough places to live, and the housing prices have shot through the roof. So if you live in a suburb in California, well, watch out, because Senate Bill 9, one of several measures, just like Senate Bill 9, alluded to by those signs, would technically allow as many as 2 duplexes, 2 houses with attached units or any combination thereof, capped at 4 units on a single family lot throughout California without local government approval. So in other words, if you live in a community, it's a subdivision, and the subdivision has single family homes, and you've worked your entire life to buy a house in the subdivision, and you've got a nice little backyard, a nice little front yard, you got a grill in the back and so forth. All of your neighbors have the same thing because they're all single family homes in your subdivision. Senate Bill 9 would supersede the local government zoning and say, you know what? Anybody in your neighborhood at any time can convert their single family home into 4 apartment units. So let's say you have a 2-story home. You can add a door in the front. So now instead of a single door in the front of your house, you've got like 2 doors because you have 2 apartments on the first floor and then maybe 2 doors in the back so that those 2 doors in the back have staircases that take you up to the 2 apartments on the second floor. You no longer have a community with single family homes. You have a community where you have some single family homes that are left, and then you also have duplexes. You have some homes that have been converted into apartment buildings. And Senate Bill 9 says, not only is that okay, but you don't even have a say in the matter. You spent your entire life buying this house that you've always wanted, that you want to live in for the rest of your life and retire in because it's your American dream to have this single family home, to have a small yard, to have the grill in the backyard and the dog with a fenced in yard. And then you have a neighbor that turns their single family home into an apartment complex and they import the ghetto, which is exactly what this bill is about. This bill is about gutting your ability to live the way you want because the progressives in California, the communists and the socialists, don't think you should live the way you want to live. But they're doing this. They're passing this bill on under the guise of equity. And they're also passing the bill under the guise of, we don't have enough affordable housing. It's just not, there's not enough affordable housing. The bill would allow more building where it's now illegal, with the intent of reducing California's fast rising home prices and increasing access to home ownership through a greater variety of options, according to State Senate Leader Tony Atkins, a Democrat from San Diego who introduced the bill and a similar version of it in the past. To lessen concerns from the more than 100 cities and neighborhood groups that oppose the bill, well, of course, the cities and the neighborhoods oppose the bills in California because those cities are in control of the local zoning ordinance. Those cities get to decide now where houses go, what the density of that housing is, and where shops go and so forth. They're engaged in the planning of their communities. And if you notice, some communities are really nice. And many times, really nice communities developed not because of money, they developed because of really good planning and really qualified elected officials who thought way ahead about how that planning was going to be rolled out. And they did so 30, 40, 50 years ago. And then as time passed, people thought to themselves, that neighborhood that seemed like it was in the middle of nowhere, that neighborhood that, and that town that seemed like it just wasn't cool. I actually think it's cool. And I've always kind of liked it, but I'm actually ready to move there. Well, California is saying to those cities and towns, you don't get to decide any of that for yourselves anymore. So all those cities and towns are going, this ain't happening. We're opposing this. This is ridiculous. This idea of gutting our ability to determine what is a single family home and whether or not there can be multifamily houses in a single family subdivision. So Atkins, the state senator on Monday, added a few amendments that give local jurisdictions some veto power over units that threaten public health and safety and curtail potential speculation. The bill approved by the Senate in May and two Assembly policy committees in June made it out of the Assembly Appropriations Committee on August 23rd and was approved by the full Assembly on August 26th on a 44-16 vote. So in other words, this bill has made it out of the state Senate and the state Assembly, and the governor is obviously going to sign it. And you could only hope that he won't, but this is Gavin Newsom we're talking about, right? It's equity. It's not fair that people should be living in a single family home in a really nice subdivision while others have to rent houses. Supporters decrying mistruths by opponents that the bill would end single family zoning said the legislation would help ease the affordable housing shortage. Assembly member Alex Lee, a San Jose Democrat, said young people like him are having to give up their dream of home ownership. I mean, look, this goes back to a fundamental American principle, and that is when you're ready to go out on your own and you're moving out of your parents' house and you're 18, or you're moving in out of college and you're 21 or 22, and you're going to go rent your first place, you typically rent where you can afford. And I'm going to speak for myself and say this, right? I had to rent where I could afford. And where I could afford was not necessarily where I wanted to be. And since it was not necessarily where I wanted to ultimately be, it made me work harder so that I could eventually buy a place or rent a place in an area where I wanted to live. And there's no better motivator than that. Not to mention, folks, you don't have to stay in California, but these same politicians that are passing this law, the Senate Bill 9, these are the very same people who have had open borders and they've ruined the state because it's overpopulated and there aren't enough housing units. And housing, supply and demand. Housing prices have gone way up. There are too many people. And what do you expect to happen when you have people running your state who don't know what they're doing? So on August 30th, the Senate voted 28-7 to concur on the House amendments, and they sent the bill to Governor Gavin Newsom's desk. The League of California Cities urged Newsom to veto what it called flawed legislation. SB 9 empowers developers, usurps local democracy, silences community voices, and fails to guarantee affordable housing, Carolyn Coleman, the league's CEO, said in a statement. So what's interesting about this is now this bill is on Gavin Newsom's desk, and Gavin Newsom is being recalled. And a lot of the individuals who are against this bill, they're not Republicans. Like, I'm talking about regular people living in these subdivisions and regular people living in these towns. They're not elected people. They're Democrats, many of them. In fact, most of them are, and they oppose this bill for that reason. This is why they oppose the bill. I mean, the bill is a giveaway to developers, right? Because a developer can now just walk into a subdivision and go, I don't need to get zoning for this. I can just turn houses into apartments in your beautiful subdivision. So it's a giveaway to developers, while at the same time, Gavin Newsom has got this concern over all of these Democrats who are upset with him anyway. And what does he do? Is he going to veto this bill or is he going to sign it? And my guess is he's going to wait until after the recall election and probably sign it. But if you're in California and you're listening to this podcast, you know what you should do? You should call out Gavin Newsom on this, not only so that he can veto it prior to the recall election, but also so that Gavin Newsom can be on record finally doing something that is the right thing. But, good old Gavin Newsom, he's going to always play that game, well, it's the big bad Republicans. They just don't want equity in housing. Equity in housing? What is that? What is that? Where I come from, you have an equal opportunity to buy something, but in order to be able to get there, you have to actually work for it. You actually have to save. You have to sacrifice to get there. Imagine that, ladies and gentlemen. You actually might have to sacrifice. And if you live in a place like San Francisco where the median price is $800,000, it may be high time to get the heck out of there. That's what I would recommend. Move to Texas. Tons of opportunity there to own a home. So anyway, banning single-family homes. That is the dumbest bill in America. And that's it for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Parler, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.